Welcome back to the channel. My name is Lucas, and before I start this episode, I quickly wanted to say that tomorrow I'm heading off to Malaysia with my lovely wife for a belated honeymoon. We're very excited, but it also means I'm not going to take anything with me there related to the podcast or my work, and that means that there will be no episodes for the next 2 to 3 weeks. Now, lucky you, because this episode is, in my opinion, one of the best on this channel. I really enjoyed speaking to Dr. David Schindler once again, as well as my friend Matthew. David is a professor of anthropology and metaphysics at the John Paul II Institute in Washington, D.C. He has a master's and a PhD in philosophy as well. David is a well of wisdom, and Matthew kind of made this conversation happen, really. Matthew came to me with the question, what is church? And we discussed this a bit offline. I thought it was an extremely interesting question, and we're both extremely interested in David's work and David's thoughts on this topic. So I told him, I bet if we ask David, we'll come closer to the truth on this. And that surely did happen. I just wanted to drive home that this is a very important and a very beautiful conversation that I hope all of you will enjoy a lot. So I will miss you all, but I'll be back very, very soon. For now, enjoy this episode. Bye-bye. I wanted to take a short couple of minutes to let you introduce yourself. So, welcome, and who are you?
Thanks, man. Yeah, I'm Matthew. I live in Canada. I grew up as an evangelical, kind of a charismatic evangelical Protestant in a really strong home with a great mom and a great dad. In my teen years, my relationship to God in my heart became very significant. And so I became a big member of my church and stuff like this. Then I went into Protestant missions, more on the kind of charismatic evangelical side again. And I lived in Nepal for about 3.5 years. I met my wife there, and we got married out there, and then came to Canada. And since then we've got our 4 children who are now 9, 7, 6, and 4. So yeah, that's kind of the picture of my story. Today we're going to talk about this question, what is church? And for me, growing up evangelical, church, I would say in a sense wasn't really legitimate. If church is the community and if church is the hierarchy, my religion and the religion of those in my community was an individual one. And so now as an adult, I've fallen in love with the early church, with the church fathers, with the Orthodox and Catholic expressions of church. But I think there's been a constant question and a questioning. This has been a question deeply in me for the last few years, like what is church to begin with? So yeah, that's quite an official look at things. But yeah, I think that's kind of what takes us to here. So you are one of all the people who I reached out to just to see what you'd say about this question, what is church? And in that conversation, you said, I should talk to Dr. Schindler about this. So
All right, now we're joined by both Matthew and David. Shortly offline, you guys got introduced as well. So we can get straight to kind of the question. And Matthew, you wanted to give some context to it as well, I think.
yeah, well, the context is, as I was just mentioning, Dr. Schindler, I grew up evangelical, and I went through quite a traumatic series of church experiences. And what happened was I kind of fell back on a prior authority, which was my dad. Like my dad very quickly reassured me, hey, this situation is a real mess, but reality's still good. And so what happened as I became an adult was I started to discover the ancient church, the Orthodox and the Catholic ways, which were totally I was absolutely ignorant of before. But yeah, now for the last few years, I've been officially like a catechumen in the Orthodox Church. But yeah, the question of what is church, it kind of, there's like on the right-hand side, there's a question from my past, from like a modernist worldview that I used to have. Like, is
Mhm.
the church a real thing? Is it a legitimate hierarchy as opposed to just individuals
Right,
playing roles or something?
right.
And then on the other hand, as I've discovered through the early church fathers and people like Jonathan Pajot, the meaning of the whole world, like the way I live now, everything is meaningful. Everything is
Mhm.
sacred in a sense. Like, I clean windows for a living, and I'm constantly, I like my feeling towards that is like this, if I do this right, this is a sacred thing. But
Yeah.
then I find kind of a I guess I'm afraid of relativism on the left hand, where it's like, well, if everything is sacred, then what are the sacraments? And
Oh,
what's
right.
the difference
Wow.
between church and like the cosmos as such?
Yeah. Yeah. That, yeah, no, that's actually a very profound question. I think that, and I mean, it seems to me, just to say this, if you hit on that question, you're going in the right direction, because I think that's uh, unless you understand that the church is somehow connected to the question of a sacred cosmos, then you don't really know what church means. It's going to end up being just um, a human institution that's put together for practical sociological
Hmm.
reasons. You know, you get people get together in order to strengthen themselves as individuals in their personal faith, but faith really is purely a personal thing. It seems to me that you'll never really get to the heart of what the church is if you go in that direction. Why don't we, before we tackle that one head on, if you if why don't we try to step back and just think about, like, what's the essence of the church, like what does church mean, and then maybe from there, does that
Yeah,
make sense?
that's
And
perfect.
please jump in. I don't want to,
Yes.
one of the dangers of my profession is that we lock into an idea and then start lecturing it. I don't want to
Well,
do that.
David, I must
Yeah,
compliment you because any conversation I've listened to with you, you make space for people and their thoughts, and it makes all of those conversations flow. That have
Oh, well, I'm happy to hear. It's important. Yeah, I find it really, it's so much more interesting. I mean, in a
yes,
certain sense, I mean, this in itself, what's the difference between a person just presenting a monologue and an actual dialogue,
yes,
trialogue here with three
right.
people?
yeah,
That actually does have something to do with church. Anyway, it seems to me that the first of all, the heart of it uh, is the incarnation. I mean, from the Christian perspective, it's that um, um, redemption is not just a message that's delivered that has a certain content that can be abstracted and you can hear it, and pass it on, and it's indifferent to the means by which it's passed. It's,
yes,
from that
Hmm.
perspective, God could have just, this is one of the things that, for example, distinguishes Christianity from Islam.
Hmm.
Judaism is a little more complicated, but Islam, God has a message that he communicated directly to his prophet,
mm,
who it was sort of dictated word for word in a very literal way, which is why, as I understand it, you're not really meant to translate the Quran. I mean, it's not
Hmm. Interesting.
really true unless it's in the original language.
yes,
Whereas in Christianity, the heart of it isn't just a message. The heart of it precisely is the incarnation. That
mm,
that the message was the logos entered into the flesh of a particular human being in history.
yeah,
And that's what redemption is actually the contact with the flesh of Christ. I mean, so that's a totally different sense of what faith is all about.
Yeah.
And then the question is, well, how do we touch the flesh of Christ? Uh, since he lived and died in a particular time period. Well, that's that's what the sacraments are in a way the extension of the incarnation into history in a way that's meant to pass on. So that it's one of the most extraordinary things. I remember when this dawned on me, it just
Yeah.
blew me away
Yes.
that every priest that you meet has been touched by someone who was touched by someone who was touched by someone who was touched by Jesus Christ. I mean,
Mm.
that's really something really
Mm.
extraordinary, and that's why the laying on of hands and the very physical act of laying on of hands in the establishment of the priesthood is such a fundamental thing. So it means that I mean, one can even go deeper, actually. Um, uh, I think the distinctive Christian principle is mediation.
Hmm.
So it's God's divinity mediated through, so you don't just have the Father. The Father expresses himself through the Son,
Yeah.
Hmm.
and the Son communicates himself through his flesh, and that communication is through the mediation of Mary, through the sacraments, through the church, through the priest. It's always this we have our relationship to God through the mediation of something concrete and real.
Is that by
Um,
necessity?
Go ahead, please.
Is that by
Sorry.
necessity that
I, I
Hmm.
think it is if the heart of it is incarnation,
Hmm.
then it's very different. That can only really be incarnately
yeah,
mediated,
yeah,
communicated.
Hmm.
Um, So yeah, I mean, and this is even from this is something that the Orthodox tend to have a better sense of than Catholics, but even the in a way the Protestants have a sense of this, but the Word of God is also sacramental. It's a mediation of God's will. There's something sort of sacramental. So it seems to me it's worth just meditating on that first of all, and then we'll talk
yes,
about the
Hmm.
cosmos in a
yes.
moment. But yeah, what are your thoughts? I mean, what do
Well,
you think about all
for
of
me,
that?
it was a major, like you said, it's to have it really dawn on you the reality of the incarnation and the reality of the flesh, the bones. That's
Hmm.
just
Yeah,
something that hadn't dawned on me even until quite recently when I was already considering myself a Christian. It still
yeah,
remains so intellectual for me.
yeah,
Where whenever I
yeah,
would speak about my faith, I would bring in all these words. And
yeah.
my father, who's a theologian, he's specialized on the historical Jesus. He always emphasized this.
Okay,
This is a
yeah,
person, and so
Person.
you have to kind of come to grips with the fact that he walked upon the same earth that you did. And kind of when I started to speak with my dad about this, it
Yeah, it's radical.
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I just second what you say, and I can
Yeah,
really recognize it in myself. I don't know about you, Matthew.
yeah.
Yeah, well, for me, actually, what helped me a lot was J.P. Marceau's book. This book,
Oh
I got
yeah,
it a year early because I entered a course that he went through, and in the
yeah.
course, he gave kind of his note or his book as he was working on it. So I printed it. Like I might have the first printed copy, which is on printer paper. And so, but yes, that helped a lot. He goes through a section after a lot of basic philosophy stuff, just taking it back to Plato, forms and potential, burying materialism, and taking really logically taking it back to the ancient world.
Yeah.
Then he makes an argument about the incarnation that I had never come across, but it's what you're saying, where
Hmm.
it's like all of the facts of the earth didn't have it was like they existed, but they didn't have they weren't expressing their final form until they came together in the person, really
Yeah,
the bones and the atoms and the cells and
yeah,
the organs
yeah,
of the
yeah,
man, Jesus
yeah,
Christ.
yeah,
And then so it's like the bottom up kind of is given a total reality at that point,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
not just the top down.
yeah,
And
yeah.
but it's not denying the top down whatsoever. It's not
Right,
saying that the
right.
potential is final or is somehow the only real. And so that was radical. And then he ends the book with really briefly but beautifully making a case for the ontology of love and this incarnational vision of all things. And
Yeah,
so that affected me a lot. To me, that was like a key. That really
yeah,
helped me.
yeah.
And it's just as you're saying, and in fact, I think he used a lot of yourself and yeah, and a few others to make these arguments. But yeah,
No, I was just thinking. Uh, so uh, the truth of all that the two of you are saying there. I mean, you think about that. It's one thing to be told that the key is this person, human being, Jesus Christ, who walked on the earth. To be told about that, it's another thing to realize the that presence has to continue in a kind of an incarnate way and sort of be
mm,
passed down again, through the particular people that he was related to,
mm,
the kind of physical realities that he chose, bread and wine, water of baptism, these sorts of things that are kind of expressions. Um, uh, I was thinking the irony. What's the difference between, you said you downloaded and printed a copy of the book. Now think
right,
about the difference between that and the books that the monks used to copy by hand.
right, right.
And there, think about there, it's being mediated through a human being, and they're trying to be as accurate as possible, but it's a totally incarnate act.
Mm.
And
Mm,
there's something about the preciousness. So, if you
mm,
lost your printout copy, you just print out another one, and in a way, its reality is in the cyber. It doesn't, its
Yes.
mm,
reality is kind of disincarnate. Whereas, a handmade book from the Middle Ages would just be
right.
absolutely precious, and there would be something about its it's communicating its reality, um, in more than just the content of what it's expressing.
Mm,
It's carrying it through in an embodied way. I know and so that's one of the dangers of podcasts, and that that we
Yes.
get used to seeing each other in this kind of disincarnate way. One of the things I love about Jonathan Pageau is I've heard him say many times, if what I'm saying is meaningful to you, turn off your computer and go into a church and sit
mm,
in silence before and that's so profound, and it really warms my heart to hear him say that, because it's such a recognition that this medium here is useful insofar as it reminds us of the reality,
Yes.
and being anchored in the flesh, and real, your aspiration, Lucas, to come over here and meet people face to
mm,
face. You realize that you want to do that,
Yes.
and that's
yeah,
that's really worth pondering. That in itself
Yes.
is a meaningful thing.
This is all very timely because I spoke to my brother about friendship recently on the channel. He's a
Yeah,
philosopher teacher, and we kind of discussed digital friendships as well.
yeah, yeah,
And yeah, all of these things are coming up and they're coming together.
yeah,
But yes, there is something missing. Like I want to meet Matthew. Like that's important.
yeah, yeah,
That would make a
yeah,
difference. Like we discussed that. It
yeah.
would
mm,
absolutely make a
And
difference.
it's hard to explain the difference, but we all recognize it. This
Yes.
is Plato and the Phaedrus. I find this, it's such a simple point, but it really
Yeah.
does, like so many things in Plato, it's just sort of endlessly rich with meaning. But he says that writing, so that's the technology he was worried
right.
Yeah.
about.
Yes.
He said it can be dangerous because
Yes.
it's abstracting meaning, but it fulfills its proper purpose when it is a reminder to those who already know.
Mm.
Mm,
So you don't, and I think about this with like digital friendships. It's very different to be in digital contact with people that you already have a real
Yes.
flesh and
right.
blood relation
Absolutely.
to.
Right.
Um, and as opposed to like substituting for that.
Yes. Yeah.
And
Makes a
if you
change.
think about, this is I mean, this is the heart of what the church is. It's a kind of a
Mm,
recognition that there's no substitute for the flesh and blood reality
Uh,
of
mhm,
the of. the of the faith.
Yes.
Yeah, and the body. Like I think what you're mentioning, the in person to person thing, seems to be like we have. I heard you mention recently this idea of the heart being where I think you said the soul and the body come
Hmm.
together. And I've
Yeah.
always thought of that as like the mind and the body. I don't know the soul versus mind thing. We don't need to get into,
No.
but yeah. And so there's something about. Well, there's something in person where my body can, in a sense, commune or communicate with your body, even
Yeah.
though it's not necessarily the same. We might say the same words as we could screen to screen, but
Right.
there's no incarnation. Like
Yeah.
it's the mind, but without the body.
Yeah.
That being said, like I'm one of these people who heard Jonathan Peugeot, heard him
Right.
say that, turned off my screen, and entered a church. And it absolutely made all the difference, of course.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think see this scripture where Christ says, "Where two or three are gathered in my name,
Yeah.
there I am."
Yeah. Hmm.
That seems to be well, I also, as much as I want to give the reality to the body, I also want to give you know what? I just simply want to be grateful. I want to be grateful for a conversation
Yeah.
like this and
Yeah. That's right.
finding truth through mind only, screen only, headphones while I'm cleaning
Yeah.
windows. I mean,
That's right.
yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Lucas. You were going to say something?
No, no, no. I just unplugged it in case something came up.
Yeah, yeah, no, it's a really good point. And I mentioned that, I never would have thought that this medium could be a real a real place of genuine
Yes.
communication. But I've learned that it can be. I mean, I see it, and it's but I think the key is it's always Plato also wrote.
Yes, exactly.
Hmm.
And he knew, I mean, but it's really interesting. He wrote, but one of the things he wrote about is a judgment of the inadequacy of words, and that's one of the things he expressed in words, in
Yeah.
written
Right.
words. And it seems to me there you get the whole picture, because he didn't just not write and not communicate in writing, which would have been like, maybe a more obvious response. If you don't think words can capture the whole truth, then why
Hmm.
speak at all, or why
Hmm.
write at all?
Right.
But nor did he just forget that insight and act as if everything can be communicated in writing. He did both. So he writes with an awareness that there's more to it than this,
Hmm.
and so he's also communicating the inadequacy of this, which allows then the medium to be a kind of what's the word I'm looking for? A kind of a trigger
Yes.
for a deeper, kind of initiation into a deeper movement or something like that.
Right.
And it seems
Yes.
to me that that's something that this medium can provide.
Yes. So many things are coming together here because I was kind of listening to you speaking about authority before this.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and it falls in line perfectly with the idea that you were saying about the political, that the answer to the political becoming something like tyrannical or
Mhm.
something like that, it's not to deny the political or to make it as minimal as possible.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
actually to reinstate it and to kind of you have probably have better words for this, but to put it in its proper place. To
Yeah.
like I started teaching at a school, young
Mhm.
kids. Before this,
Yeah.
I was very skeptical about school system, this and that. And then now that I'm in it, I'm like, oh well, this is obviously the way to make it better. It's like
Hmm.
to fully go into it and
Yeah.
through it.
Yeah.
And so, but
Yeah.
there's a
So
lot of brilliant stuff.
you
Yeah.
open it up from the inside that way.
Yes.
Hmm.
Yes.
Well,
Yeah.
that's what I feel like I'm doing with church. Like, to be honest, um, my part of the question, what is church, is I hope, in as much as I participate in church, is to be something of like a renewal
Yeah.
to church. And like, this is not renewal is usually like a waterfall or something. I'm talking about like the drop, one drop that I can be. But I want to be something like that, but I can only do so from the inside. Like what Lucas, what you're saying about the school. Like it seems like I don't know how to parse this, but somehow it doesn't seem possible to criticize or to question
Yeah.
something from the outside. Like it doesn't,
Yeah,
does that make
yeah,
sense? And
yeah,
question, I
right.
don't mean criticize and like especially from ignorance or to call it into question because I'm above it or to judge it. I mean
Yeah.
question more in like the in scripture the word for Eve in the original translation is beneficial adversary. So it's
Hmm.
something like a renewal and yeah, it seems and so I want to be that and I
Yeah.
want to be very careful to be that.
Hmm. Well, yeah, right. So how did God deal with the problem of sin? Right. So you say, okay, that's something to
Mm,
be criticized or rejected, but how did he reject it? It wasn't from the outside,
mm,
right? He
Oh,
was
yeah.
made sin. I mean, that's the,
Yes.
Philippians hymn is extraordinary. He actually entered into not just into the form of not just into to human flesh, but all the way into corrupt
Yes.
human flesh
mm,
to redeem it to redeem it from within, but precisely by assuming it, but
mm,
not assuming it in the sense of capitulating to it,
Yeah.
but assuming it by being sent. And this is why the Trinitarian sense of God, that the Son enters into the form of sin precisely in obedience to the Father, not because he wants to. You see,
mm,
I mean, if he wanted to get into sin, that would that would be,
Yeah.
that
mm,
would be suspicious, and there would be a problem. But if it's done in obedience to the Father, it's perfectly holy from
mm,
start to finish. But that perfect holiness is not self-protective over against the bad stuff that it criticizes from the outside. It rather, um, in perfect confidence, can enter all the way into the heart of it, to the furthest extreme. I mean, and this is, um, the ancient church's sense of all the way to the depths of hell.
Mm.
The whole mystery that we'll be celebrating this coming weekend of the descent, the incarnation goes all the way into the depths of hell and comes out the other side. I mean,
mm.
that's mind blowing.
And it remains tragic, even though you kind of know that it gets renewed.
Yeah,
You still feel the immense tragedy and sadness somehow. I
yeah,
find that I find that also puzzling about it. Like I know that God is good and that creation is good, but at the same time, the pain, the tragedy, the anger, it's all real.
yeah. It is. Yeah, no, tragic. And it's interesting that you used the right word. It's tragic. And the Greek tragedy from the beginning always had that ambiguity of not just suffering, but the most extreme suffering conceivable,
Mm.
but always with a kind of a sense of redemption all the way through it. Greek tragedy is not depressing. It's always got this kind of redemptive sense, and I think that's a kind of an intimation of this great central Christian mystery.
Mm.
Yeah.
Did you ever see there was a really interesting debate between Zizek and Jordan Peterson?
I
I've
did,
Have
yeah.
you?
seen bits of it.
Yeah, it's interesting. Zizek mentions there, he always says this, um, he always announces that he's an atheist, of course, but he then it talks about the importance of prayer and the incarnation and so forth. And Chesterton is his favorite author, but um, he says the most profound thing he's ever encountered in any text is the description of Christ's descent into hell, and that made a
Mm.
Zizek mentioned this, and I remember Jordan Peterson expressed a real. He was profoundly moved by it. Then I saw in an interview later he brought it up again, that he said he just couldn't stop thinking about it. It was made such a profound impression, and I think it does because it's
Mm.
something really absolutely central about that.
That reminds me of Dostoevsky. Before the call, Lucas was showing me some of his Dostoevsky novels in Dutch.
Yeah,
And in The Idiot, the central figure of the image of the dead
Yeah.
Christ.
Oh,
I
right.
found out that Dostoevsky went, now I can't remember the name of the city in
It was in
Switzerland.
Switzerland, I want to say, right?
It
Was it?
was
Yeah.
Yeah.
where the University of Switzerland is, but not, yeah, I can't
Yeah.
remember the name of
Is
the
it in
place.
Zurich or in Basel?
Basel. It was Basel because I
Okay.
remember finding out that he was there very close to when Nietzsche was there,
Oh,
very
wow.
close to when Carl
That's
Jung's father was teaching.
That's
And
insane.
so there was a wild thing happening all at the same place. But there was this
wow.
painting that you're familiar with,
Right.
and it's in the foreword to my copy of The Idiot. And it just says that the book was written as he stood staring at that painting for 2
Yeah.
hours or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, Dostoevsky had a sense of this more than just about anybody.
Mm.
Really remarkable for that reason. Nietzsche had a sense of it too, but without the joy of the redemption that's connected
Yes.
to it.
Hmm. See, can I ask you, so as I've been thinking about this question, the question first began as what is a woman, which was quite fun. And I read your article on gender. There's an article
Oh,
online,
yeah,
I can't
yeah,
remember,
yeah,
and so I talked to a few friends about this. What is a woman? And I kind of came to a funny solution that like, what is a woman? I am a woman. Like me, in as much as I can be myself, I'm the church, and I'm the feminine expression to this cosmic story.
yeah,
And so then that turned from what is a woman to what is church. And
yeah.
I began looking at it from scripture itself, and
Hmm.
comparing there people talk about the Bible. You can even see it as Old Testament, New Testament, but there's a creation and there's a redemption.
Yeah.
And there seems to be these two aspects. And then I saw in the story of creation that the feminine was taken out of the masculine, taken out of his side. So Adam's
Yeah.
side was opened up. In English, we say that the rib was taken, but I found out that the original translation doesn't necessarily mean rib. It just means side.
Side.
Out
Yeah.
of the side of Adam came this feminine aspect who became like a mirror, and a reflection of
Hmm.
himself back to him in a sense, because he's there naming the animals,
Yeah.
and then what's she doing? She's listening to the animals.
Hmm.
And so, but I see in the creation story, there's Eve, the mother of all that is living.
Hmm.
And that's the question I asked earlier, this question of like, well, how do I not just like stay there? Because
Yeah.
I do see that all that is living has this sacred thing. But
Uh,
when I
Yeah.
look at the story of Christ, because what happens with Adam, he's put to sleep. That's a key. The
Right.
thing is, he's put to sleep, and then out of his side is taken the feminine. And when Christ dies, then his side is also opened up, and out of his side comes the blood and the water. And
Yeah.
I found out there's traditions. Maybe this is very mainstream, and I'm just coming to know of it. But that's seen in the church as the sacraments. That's
Yeah.
seen
That's right.
as he died, as he was asleep. They
Yeah.
opened his side.
Right.
They didn't break his bones. They didn't break that which was, the solid in the structure of him.
Yeah.
But out of his side came this fluidity, and that is the church in
Yeah.
some way.
Yeah. That's right. That's right. Yeah. No. 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 I mean, yeah. That's. I don't know how mainstream it is. That I remember learning about that and being really profoundly transformed by it. And it you see then the connection between the two, but it's not just a repetition. Christ and then Mary becomes the kind of real symbol of that, of the church. I mean, that's a whole other dimension. How all these fit together is
Mhm.
fascinating. But it's not just a repetition of creation. It's a recapitulation at an infinitely higher order. I think that comes back to this question about your original question about what's if we have a sacred cosmos, and what's the difference between a sacred cosmos and a church?
Right.
And I think that's the key, is to see that I mean, there are all sorts of technical terms one can use, analogy and that kind of thing, but I think that maybe the first one to use is that um, you used the language of ground up and top down.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the ways to think of the relationship between creation and redemption. There's a kind of a ground up movement towards the groaning of creation, towards the revelation of the children of God, to a revelation of the church, and
Mhm.
that's the top down that meets what's coming up from below and
Mm.
is able to take it up and transform it. But it can transform it only because the natural world was ordered to
Pregnant.
this and meant for this. Yeah, and pregnant with it. So I think if it's the case that the whole natural world is meant to be taken up into the church, it has this, sacred character, but it's different from being then actually sacramentally assumed from above, as it were. So that would be one way, to my mind, of distinguishing between the two. And this is why, the bread that I make in the oven is different from the consecrated host on the altar, even
Mm.
though you might say that the bread has was always meant to be, it's always pointing towards and meant to be taken up into the Eucharist. They're not the
Mm.
same thing, and I can't satisfy the need for the sacraments just by making a sandwich downstairs.
Mm.
That would be
Mm.
something though, if you could do
Yeah,
that.
that would be. Yeah. But the problem is typically people go too far in the other direction. And that's why I really like your question, because some people just see absolutely no connection whatsoever um, between, the sacraments become kind of magic
Yes,
from above, and they have no connection at all with the natural world. And then the world is understood then as purely secular and meaningless
Right.
yes.
Neutral. Yeah. Your
and
father would
neutral.
have
And
none of
that's, I
that.
mean, yeah, I think that's a much more common problem in the
Mm.
West.
That's the
Yes.
the reject the world type of idea. What's
Yeah.
popular on YouTube, reject the world. But
Yeah.
what I
Yeah.
was gonna say, I had a conversation with someone about Nietzsche's magnum opus, Thus Spoke Zarathustra,
Mhm.
and it was about Nietzsche's critique of Christianity as well, not being life affirming. And
Yeah.
when I heard
Yeah.
that, I immediately was like, well, I don't experience Christianity that way. To
Yeah.
me, it's more of what you're saying. Like it gives it life. Like it
Oh,
makes it.
absolutely. Yeah. No, and I mean that's the heart of it. I came so that they might have life and have it in abundance. I mean, the whole thing is meant to be life affirming. But you read about Nietzsche and that time. I mean, if you think about uh, this is part of the need to think through history, which is something new to me. I was always metaphysics, and
Yeah.
I thought metaphysics had no interest in history, but I've I've over the years acquired an interest in political philosophy, which I never thought would happen, and now a desire. I just wish I knew history better.
Yeah.
It's too
Mm.
late for me on that score. But it is really interesting to think of, if you think of the church really is at the heart of the drama of the whole meaning of history, and I would
Mm.
affirm that. It's interesting to see, how modern history develops. You have this original um, convergence in the patristic period is when the church is taking up the pagan world, and in the medieval period is sort of where you have this kind of living relationship of a unity between the natural and supernatural, and then towards the end of the Middle Ages that you start to get this division, and we could talk about where it comes from, but think about it in the with the Reformation in the 16th century, and then the birth of the modern world. So the Reformation, now you finally have this kind of fragmentation
Mhm.
that lets the world sort of um, emerge independently of the Christian story, as it
Yes.
were.
Mm.
And then, in the 17th century, the Enlightenment, it's sort of let's rethink the whole world outside of
Yeah.
any connection to the church. The 18th century, you have the revolutions, which are nothing but um, establishing in reality a kind of rejection of
Of
this
Christendom.
of Christendom. That's the heart of it. That's what it is. Yeah. And then what's the 19th century? The 19th century is when an anti-Christian world has become now the global sort of
Mm.
default place. And this is the age in which the word boredom
Mm,
first was, didn't exist before, Um,
Mm.
uh, this is the industrialization. And then you think of all of these figures like Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, whom we mentioned, Kierkegaard's another one,
yeah.
of this uh, confrontation with nihilism is also coined in the 19th
Yes.
century.
Mm.
This the first time that you have just this radical sense of nihilism and the kind of Christianity that it didn't really get to the heart of this. It tended to uh, try to preserve religious ideas and things sort of next to
Mm. Or within
the
an
world.
accidental cosmos.
And exactly,
Yes,
right,
yes.
right. While embracing kind of modern progress and things. And so, of
Mm.
course, it's either going to be totally irrelevant, or if it enters, it's always going to take the form of this oppressive intrusion
Yes.
Hmm.
on life. And that's,
Because it doesn't
Nietzsche
align with,
makes a lot of sense when you
yeah,
think of him in that context.
Hmm.
yeah, yeah. It stops aligning with the world that you inhabit. Like it's no longer
Yeah.
so.
Or in enlivening. It's
Yes,
no
Right.
longer no longer the soul of the world.
yes. But then
Right.
that makes it interesting as to where we are today, right? Because
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
that's Nietzsche. Nietzsche, and I like to think about Nietzsche and his answer to all of this, um, and kind of concluding that God is dead and
Yeah.
we killed
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, that's a really poignant, and you read that. I mean, people think that it's this triumphant rejection of God or something, but you read that passage. I mean, that's not
Yes,
at all what it is. It's
there
the
are some lines after that. It's
Oh, I know
amazing.
exactly. And you see, it's Nietzsche's suffering. He was in, it wasn't like he wanted there to be no God. It was
Mm,
he thought of himself as speaking in a way on behalf of the world. Where are we going? And there was a profound suffering in that.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
but what is curious is why he was unable to see. Why didn't he see something like a return to Christianity as a recovery of the life that he sought?
Hmm.
yes.
Yeah. Well, he
That's
seemed, and your brother actually, Lucas's brother is somewhat of a scholar on Nietzsche, really. He
I
teaches
didn't know.
Nietzsche.
Oh wow,
Yeah, he
yeah,
did his master's
So,
thesis on Nietzsche, titled "The Pious Antichrist: Nietzsche as a
wow,
Religious Thinker." So he's been very deep into this for years now, and
wow.
that's his thinker basically. So
That's amazing. I wrote my senior thesis in college on Nietzsche and tragedy,
mm.
oh,
and tried to judge it from a Christian perspective.
that's wonderful.
It was
I'd love to read that. By the way,
I mean, I was 20 years old when I wrote it,
that's why I
so
would like to read it.
yeah,
That'd be
Yeah.
interesting. Yes.
yeah.
So, Lucas, you mentioned like what do we do? How do we take this to the moment now? See,
Yeah.
like I was talking to Lucas. Um, I hope this isn't offensive, but I was talking to Lucas before about this, and the way I described it as a modern person, someone who grew up in modernity, in a
Yeah.
Protestant town of like not, I don't know if there's anybody familiar with the ancient church in driving range.
Yeah.
And so, um, and
Thank
so,
goodness for the internet then, right? Yeah.
right. And so it's a different community. I have a wonderful Orthodox church near where I live now. But growing up in that world, so the analogy that I gave to Lucas was like, man, I love the church. I want to participate in the church as it is, and I see a kind of purity, almost like a seed kind of purity of the early church, in
Yeah.
the sense, and I don't deny the expression of church as it is right now,
Yeah.
in its reality, in its multiplicity, in its size, and its growth. But there's a kind of purity of like the seed at the beginning, that I see that church somehow is more true or real, or is I shouldn't say more real. What I mean is it's more of the
Evident.
essence, closer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, and it seems closer in time, closer in practice, closer in worldview.
Yeah.
And so, but now, like, I am a modern person and I
Yeah.
exist and I am a product of the modern world. And so my analogy was like, man, the church as it was, that's not an option now. Like the church is bifurcated. And so the
Yeah.
church is schismed and divorced. And so I said it's like I feel like an orphan looking for a family and the only option is divorced parents.
Yeah. Oh,
You know what I
interesting.
mean? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I've always, I've always felt like the Orthodox and the Catholics were kind of on the same team, to put it in kind of banal language,
Mm.
with respect to the modern world, and that there's a kind of, but it's interesting. Uh, it's my some conversations I've had with my wife when she hears that someone is becoming Orthodox. She always says that it saddens her that it's not, being Catholic. What, and I normally haven't felt that sort of sadness, because as I said, I sort of think of our for me the point is this living connection to the ancient, to the church, the continuity with the whole apostolic succession and that kind of thing. But I've come to realize I need to think more about this, and the division really is that's tragic. I mean, all
Mhm.
the Reformation is uber tragic. I mean, with the real fragmentation. I mean, think about how different the conversation would be between Christianity and the secular world if Christianity basically meant one thing
Yes.
and wasn't a kind of an infinite number of different churches and so forth. It sort of has lost all credibility in a way.
That
Um,
there's something there. The loss of credibility, I think, to a modern person and to the
yeah,
modern world. Like I'm lucky, and I think I genuinely put the credit to this to my parents.
yeah,
My parents who grew up in a secular world, but who, because of having such great parents, I was able to, like I said, like I went through real trauma with a local church.
yeah,
I was completely cut off from my community for not following things I believe to be wrong. And
yeah,
so, like, but that didn't make me despise the church. That didn't make me
yeah,
leave. I was able to then go, okay, reality's still good. The church, whatever it is, I love it.
yeah, yeah,
So there's something of like the loss of credibility. It feels that way, and I feel like I'm trespassing so far beyond what I should have any reason to speak about. But at the same time, on the other hand, like I believe something like the answer, the meaning after the postmodern predicament, after the meaning crisis, or from
mhm,
here, I, at least right now, believe there's either the church can somehow become unified, or
yeah,
this
yeah,
is the end of our world, the end of our civilization. I'm not sure.
yeah.
But it seems that for the church to be the answer, it needs to be married. It needs to be somehow one. And yet,
Yeah,
the practical boots on the ground reality, that seems absolutely unlikely.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, and that's so, I mean, this is the drama of history, and that problem is at the heart of the drama of history. And it's striking if you think about the farewell speeches in Scripture in John's Gospel, uh, when Christ is saying, "Okay, I'm leaving." What did he talk about? He talked about unity.
Mm.
That they may be one, speaking to the Father, that you as you and I are one. It's interesting that unity should be so central in this final sort of message to humanity. That's striking, and we have really betrayed that in the various schisms.
So
Yeah, so how does that, I mean, to me that, there's hope and then there's reason for despair. The reasons for despair are, like you say, boots on the ground. It's hard to see evidence of that. And I mean, in terms of the Catholic Church, there have been so many scandals and problems. I mean, it's hard to understand how anyone can retain faith in some in one respect. But there's also profound reasons for hope. I mean, one is that the reality of it is greater than any individual persons and decisions that we might make. There's a sense in which the reality abides. Reality remains good, as you said earlier, Matthew, and that's also the church remains good, even if even if the good church is embodied in sinful members, the church remains good. And it's also, I think, a sign of hope that there are so many people now that want to recover the ancient church. I
Mm,
mean, that seems to be exploding in a way. This
right.
desire to recover the tradition in ways when I was growing up, nobody would
no,
speak in that way at all. I mean,
no,
nobody. And now it's becoming fairly common. And maybe that will there's there's a common love of, I mean, and this is something that includes even Protestants for whom the tradition is not as central. I mean, I know many Protestants who want a more traditional form of Christianity. So I mean, that sort of common desire could introduce new possibilities of a kind of recovery of unity. I mean,
Mm.
who knows? But
yes,
it's hopeful.
yes. Wolfgang,
I mean, would you say that's your experience, Lucas? What's your experience with the
yeah,
in terms of a desire for sort of traditional
yeah.
forms?
Well, it is
Yeah.
happening. Like recently, there was an article just from the Netherlands here, really young people joining Orthodox churches, even
Hmm.
people that don't listen to Jonathan Bishop
Yeah. Yeah.
somehow
Yeah.
get there
He's
too.
he's been the key. Yeah.
He's been the key
Yeah.
somehow. But no, there is that shift happening. And at the same time, when I really think about it realistically, uh, I find it hard to see. But then again, who thought Christ would rise from the dead? Even when he was seen, they
Yeah.
wouldn't, the women that saw him at the grave, it's like
Yeah.
they were scared, they were shocked. It's not so I think we're kind of having our own descent in a way.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's necessary. And I wanted to add a little bit of Wolfgang Smith in here because he's had a big
Okay.
impact on me and Matthew both. Uh,
Okay.
and he's
Well,
since passed recently. But
I just learned that yesterday or 2 days ago. I didn't know that he had passed,
oh,
actually.
yes,
Yeah,
yes, it was relatively recently. Luckily, he lived a very long life.
he did.
I paid a tribute to him. I made a video of his like a conglomeration of his work. But
Oh,
yeah, he had a big impact on me. But one of the
wow,
things,
that's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it really stuck with me somewhat. It's also the reason I started this podcast. Almost, it kind of lured me onto the internet because I thought he was so gripping that I wanted to speak about his work. Uh, anyway, he kind of offhand mentioned one time that he believed the church had to become one again. Uh,
Hmm.
it's not a central part of his work. And then
Hmm.
when he was pressed upon on this very topic, he was like, "Well, do you know Malachi Martin by chance? Theologian,
I know the name. I don't. I've never.
Catholic
Yeah.
theologian.
I mean, kind of an apocalyptic thinker. Is that
I'm not 100% sure. I don't honestly don't know him very
okay?
well, but he was very close to Wolfgang, and
Okay.
and he had this idea, and Wolfgang is actually. I was going to Roman Catholic Church here close by. I just picked the closest church here, and
Mhm.
Wolfgang was the person that kind of made me stop going.
Oh, wow.
Funnily enough, because he was convinced that the Catholic Church was ever since a certain Vatican Council no longer
Right.
legitimate or something like that.
Right.
And at the
That's
same
right.
time, so he was going
That's
to
right.
some sort of an underground Catholic church. He was mentioning,
Yeah. No. That's yeah. There's a
and
lot of that. I know many, many people that are taking that direction.
that's
Yeah.
it really because I'm out of this world. I'm not in this world at all. So
Yeah. Yeah,
I'm
no, it's I mean it's part of the tragedy in that when I was talking about various scandals. So that was the Vatican II, a council that occurred in the 60s.
yes,
that it was the church's attempt to engage with the modern world, and there were I mean I so there's some people that think that that was the beginning of the end of the
Mm.
Catholic Church, and
Hmm.
a sign of a kind of radical betrayal. But I don't think that that's I don't think that that's the right way to read it.
That's
But
reassuring.
I do, you know, it was often the case, if you look at the whole history of the church, it's often the case that when you had councils, there would be decades of unrest afterwards, because
Yes.
what
Hmm.
happened at the council would be interpreted one way and then another way, and that, you know, would take a good century for the
Yeah.
true teaching of the council to be finally sort of realized, and all sorts of tendencies to heresy in the meantime. And I think something similar could be said about Vatican II.
Yeah.
You know, immediately there was this modernizing of the church. There are many impulses in that direction that are clearly signs of betrayal of the heart of it. But I think that, you know, in figures like John Paul II and Ratzinger, who became Benedict XVI, you know, they represent, I think, a more authentic interpretation of the council. But, you know, the problem is then in the last just couple of decades, especially, so Wolfgang Smith would be kind of an earlier, and some of my family, my father's side of the family, took that route too. They
Ah, interesting.
completely split from the church
Yes.
to follow a more traditionalist. I mean, you know, I love that, as you can tell from what I've said earlier, this desire to recover the tradition,
Yeah.
absolutely, and this criticism of modernity, absolutely. But to do it in a way that breaks with the tradition
Yes. It feels like
is,
what we were speaking about before, the negation, the saying no, the rejection.
yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah.
and
That's right. That's
it
right. Criticizing from the outside.
it comes
Right.
back to our earlier point of going into
Yeah. No.
school, going
Yeah.
into church.
Thank you.
Yes, that's
Well,
what.
does this,
That's right.
maybe
Yeah.
this is so simple it doesn't need to be said, but does this have to do with, you spoke to Ken Lowry about
Beautiful
authority,
conversation,
and that was,
I
it
have to
was a
say.
wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
But what you talked about in authority was this kind of, well, the authority is actually, again, it's not just top down. The
Mhm.
authority is the mediator. The authority is that you're actually just being the lens for what's coming from above. And so to split with the church, or to split in order to preserve in
Yeah.
nostalgia something that was prior, somehow
Yeah.
you lose authority because you are no longer family, you're no longer together.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's absolutely, absolutely true. And do you know, I actually think that what Nietzsche most um, regretted, I mean, was a loss of a principle of authority in the world, actually. I
Oh.
mean, I think that's a very
Mm.
unusual way of reading
Yeah.
Nietzsche. But when it occurred to me, I have to say it has
Mm.
clarified so many things in his work. And
Interesting.
that's
Like
will to
authority is
power
dead.
is kind of like a substitute authority.
Yes.
Sorry?
Mm. Like authority is dead and we have killed it,
Yeah,
something like that.
yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
Mm.
And then there's no point of reference. And so the whole cosmos is kind of spinning out what's up and what's down. Nothing, you know, you don't have any real ultimate reference point
Mm.
that gives order to things. And that's exactly right. If you try to recover a tradition in a nostalgic way, you're turning it into a content that
Yes.
is detached from the historical mediation.
Mm.
And so, I mean, the irony is the traditionalists are modernists,
Mm.
Yes. That's
you
true.
know, because
Mm.
because the only way
It
to
has to be alive.
participate in tradition is to receive it historically, concretely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Mm.
so, I mean, right, the moment you have that decisive break, there really is no way to to get back except by, you know, through forgiveness and, you know,
Mm.
this more sort of sacramental, real
And to die.
reconciliation that,
It's something
yeah,
like, and to enter into the death and just, that's as much as we can do.
that is as much.
The alternative would be, see, I have this image of these young radical Republicans
Hmm.
making a plan to how to solve
Yeah,
Ukraine and Russia. and having a plan of how to solve that division and that breaking. And there's something,
Yeah.
and then they try to solve it and it ends up in a complete mess.
Yeah.
And so
That's
there's something of like, I, at the same time, on one hand, long for the church to be one. And then on the other hand, I also know that right now, there's something like, I really don't want a cheap ecumenicism. And
yeah.
there's something like it would be totally inappropriate for the church to just make a plan and a deal in a sense. Like,
Yeah.
Zelensky, you get this, Putin, you get this. And okay, Catholics, you need to follow this
Right.
Orthodox,
Right.
like get rid of the filioque, but then the Orthodox can still submit to you as the first among equals, and the Protestants need to stop protesting. Like some sort of deal like that
Yeah.
seems equally artificial in that
Yeah.
nostalgia for structure kind of way. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, well, and that's Solovyev's idea of the Antichrist is the one who kind of brokers a deal
Yes. Yes.
Interesting.
to bring
Okay.
all these groups together. I mean, that's, right. I mean, it has to be organic,
Hmm.
and an organism isn't brought back to life through negotiations. Um,
Hmm.
so how it comes back to life, that's not our doing, as you say. I mean, that's why sort of deepening our own fidelity to what's been given to us is the best we can do. And
Let
there,
me
you're
ask
not,
you, I'm
please.
sorry. Let me ask you about that for me though, because I grew up Protestant. And
Yeah,
so can I choose my own
yeah,
church? You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like for
yeah,
me to return to my tradition wouldn't even be Protestantism. In a sense, it would be my dad grew up secular.
yeah.
Like I as a
No, that's a
modern.
great question. Thank you. Well, I
Mhm.
mean, but I guess the way I would think about that is, what are the roots of the secular? What are the roots of Protestantism? If you think of Protestantism precisely as a tradition, right? That means it's rooted in something. Um,
Mhm.
it's not just an abstractable content. So what's it rooted in? I mean, ultimately, even Protestantism is rooted in the church,
Mhm.
the ancient church.
Yes.
So deepening the roots, you eventually will have to get there. And even secularism is totally inexplicable, apart from this attempt to take all the content of Christianity outside of any real connection with it.
Mhm.
So it's a rethinking of the whole of human existence as an alternative to Christianity. But
Yes.
that means, it also has its roots in the
Mhm.
church.
And so you would say it is legitimate in a sense for me to enter the Orthodox or the Catholic Church, despite the fact I'm from a small town in northern BC.
Yeah, I would say so. Right. I don't. I mean, I would need to get to know you better.
Right.
I don't. I mean, in a way, it's my answer can't but be superficial.
Of course.
In this context. But yeah, but it seems to me it has to be the case that the deeper you go into your roots, the closer it gets to the this heart of history, which is the church. It
Hmm.
has to be the case. Now, whether Orthodoxy or Catholicism, or that becomes more complex, I think,
Hmm. Right.
for me.
Yeah.
Well,
Um,
there's a question of do things need to die? Because that is kind of a topic that is looming over all of this. I don't know if you're aware, but there's been a bit of doom and gloom from um, let's say Jordan Hall, Jonathan Bishop. Uh, it's
yeah, what? Yeah, tell them no, I'm not familiar with it.
me neither
I don't.
because
I actually don't. For all of the podcasts I've been on, I've actually never listened to one all the way through.
that's so good. I'm so happy to hear that. This is wonderful.
Yeah.
So I'm not also
Somehow that's comforting. Somehow that's
yes.
comforting. And you must not wash windows for a living.
No.
Well, see, I think I would if and the problem is my car still has a CD player in it. Um, I that's the only way I know how to do it. I think if I had some way of listening to podcasts, I probably would commuting to work. I just don't
Right.
have a way of doing that. But anyway, I mean, yeah. What is the trend here,
Well, I
Lucas?
don't. Well, I don't actually know the content of it because I'm a very optimistic person, and
Okay.
I've people in my network, my brother specifically, and two friends that are kind of really into tracking all of this very
Yeah.
tightly, and we last week we had kind of coming together. I don't know if you're familiar with estuary, but it's basically a form of conversation that has a bit of structure in which we can engage meaningfully. Anyway, we were discussing the future, and I wanted to discuss the future with you because it's part of this conversation as well.
Hmm.
And so while I'm not following exactly what Jordan Hall and what Jonathan
Yeah.
are saying, it's not good. They're
Yeah.
they're quite negative. And Jonathan has been saying for years it's going to get so much worse before it gets better,
Yeah.
and kind of preparing us for all of that. I'm not a big fan of thinking like that. Um,
Do you know the Leonard Cohen song? Do you know Leonard Cohen? Here's a
yes.
fellow Canadian. The future. I've seen the future, brother, and it's murder. It's actually a really good song. But yeah,
Mm.
what do you
Yeah.
think?
That's what I'm kind of fearing. This I don't think this rhetoric is helpful for me in aiming toward the future if I'm already assuming it's going to
Yeah.
get worse. But of course, they have the underlying thought, being Christian,
Yeah.
that it's going to be renewed. I'm just wondering in the back of my mind, do we need a bigger crisis than kind
Mm.
of the ones that we've been
Yeah.
addressing, the wars that are going on? Is this not enough death?
Yeah.
Uh,
Right.
it was the 20th century not enough. Like I'm teaching
Yeah.
my
Right.
students now about the Second World War, and a lot of stuff happened just in my neighborhood. People getting um, sent to concentration camps, and yeah. So that's kind of my question. I'm wondering how you think about. Of course, we spoke a bit about the church and that future, but in general, what stance are we to take? Uh, Something I think.
Yeah, no, that's no, thank you. That's really, and I like the way you put it. I haven't thought of it in those terms. I've often heard people say that, we need to hit bottom, and that's when there'll be a moment of
Yeah,
renewal. And then your response is, well, haven't we already hit bottom? And that's
Yeah.
that's actually a really compelling point. Yeah, my there was one point on which I used to argue with my father that we, I learned so much from him, and I received so much from him, and was formed so much by him. But there were a couple of points that we really kind of
yeah,
disagreed in a fundamental way. But one had to do with this sort of reading of history. He always said that the history has to take the form of the crucifixion. That there will be a hope for a resurrection, but it will only, if the world has been created in Christ, and we see that Christ Himself um, experienced finally the abandonment even by the
yeah,
Father, that
yes,
that extreme suffering that we were talking about, then that is the destiny of history. So that's something that my father used to say, and I don't know. I mean, I think, first of all, the first thing that one has to say is that it is and remains and will always be mysterious.
Mm.
There's only so much value in speculating about what's going to happen in the future. I mean, and even Scripture says don't do that,
yes,
Mhm.
which is worth recalling. But I was struck by this an Orthodox writer. I don't know, Matthew, if you've read any of Alexander Schmemann.
Come on. Yeah. I've not read. Remember, I don't read.
That's right. You
I
know,
listen to
you
the
know,
audiobook for the life of the world.
yeah. Oh yeah. I mean,
Right.
what an amazing book. And he's one of the great souls of the last century. I mean, he really was something else. Um, but I recall it was quite an eye-opening observation. It was one of his criticisms of Catholicism. I think his criticisms of Catholicism have been the ones that have been most um, uh, on point for me. Like the greatest uh, objections to Catholicism have been ones I've encountered in Schmemann's work, actually.
Mm.
Um, but one of them was that he thought that Catholics were too focused on the crucifixion, and he insisted that the resurrection is the heart of the matter. And as a priest, for him, the Mass was about celebrating the resurrection. And that there it could be a point of emphasis, and I think there's room for all sorts of variations. But I think that he's making a point that's absolutely crucial, which is that Jesus was crucified in our place.
Mm.
That we don't simply go through in a literal way what Jesus did. He did it for us, and
Yes.
there's a certain sense in which our principal role as Christians is not to repeat what Jesus did, but to receive the fruits of
Yes.
the gift
Wow.
of of what he did. So and I think that means that history won't necessarily be a crucifixion. Now, it certainly can be, and in a way, like Peter, who in resisting the crucifixion was crucified worse, upside down.
Yeah.
It may turn out to be worse than a crucifixion, but I don't think any of that has to be
Mm.
the case. And the heart of it is that the crucifixion has already occurred,
Right.
and the world has already been redeemed in some ultimate way. So we know it. We know from the beginning it all turns out well.
Hmm.
What ultimately that's the case, but we don't know what the proximate expression of that is and will be. Um,
Hmm.
I'm
we
still
just
here.
lost Lucas.
Yeah, I'm still here. It's just my my alarm just went off, so my video is gone, but I'll be
Oh,
back in a sec. I'll just be listening. Yeah.
okay, yeah. Yeah, Uh, I don't know how apocalyptically inclined you are,
Yeah. Well,
Matthew.
I don't really care too much. I'm like
Yeah,
I And so, yeah, there's something
yeah,
there's something
yeah.
inappropriate
Right,
about
right.
me taking the place of judge on the world
Hmm.
when, my own house is plenty.
Yeah,
There's something like it seems like that being said, the response, if I do think about something like global, where the world's going, like I said before, like um, it does seem, given the meaning crisis, it does seem like the church could be an answer if, or that the church is an answer. The
yeah,
church is in fact the answer, but in as much as the church is not in unity, people can't know us. Like they know us by our unity,
yeah,
and so it's like we can't have that become what
yeah,
it must be. But like one way I thought about this. Now, this is not again, I hope that this is not offensive because there's so much more to this than just the minds of a bunch of individuals.
mhm,
But it seems like I could imagine if you asked me, okay, we need to have the church fall in love with the body of the church, like really fall in love with the whole church instead of
mhm.
fall in love with my particular set
Yeah,
of beliefs over and against those others who are 99% similar. But
right.
like if I had to see a way for that to happen, I do not want this kind of planned ecumenicism. I do not
Yeah,
want this deal brokering like you're mentioning.
Mm.
And then, but I could see that if everybody, let's say everybody in a coming generation was brought up with a love, even though we're living in the structures of a bifurcated church, but if we were brought up with a love for the unity,
yeah,
like that's the way that I'm raising my kids already now.
yeah,
Um, I could see in 100 years that, in fact, all of those people have totally transformed
yeah,
the bifurcation through an organic, like you were saying, that the life comes not through an idea just being imposed, but the life comes in this bottom up potential kind of a way, where it's
yeah,
like the new life and the probably the younger, probably the renewal of those who are young and who are getting all the insights. I don't know.
yeah,
But it seems like if it's organic in them, then that maybe could be an answer for a unity again. But for me,
yeah,
that does not mean that I make that happen. That simply means I live that. That means I fall in love with the
yeah.
church.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. uh, agree 100%. That's the yeah.
Yeah. I one thing that I wanted to bring up though about unity is that does unity ever really exist without, diversity? Because this is something I mentioned to Matthew before when we spoke about this, and texting about it. Because the way I see it is that even if we would get to some sort of a temporary unity, that doesn't it by nature always fragment to a degree at least? Um,
Mm.
Reality, and I feel even it's echoed in the figure of Christ, is it is unity and diversity at the same time, masculine,
Yeah,
feminine, all of these things coexisting somehow.
yeah,
Um, I don't know if we need to fly under the same exact color. I don't
yeah.
know how to see that.
I think it's really important to make a distinction between difference and fragmentation.
Yes, yes,
So
yes,
I mean I
absolutely.
think there's a healthy kind of diversity that is, if it's not there, unity is also not there.
Yeah, yeah,
You know, that a healthy kind of diversity is actually a sign of unity. Um, but then there's a diversity that becomes mutual opposition and fragment and painful and destructive and
yes.
disordered. And there's nothing good about that.
Mm,
But it's also the case that, this is the something I've been reflecting on in the last few months a lot, is the Felix culpa, that kind of, even that kind of disorder though is not something to be afraid of, because the it can be transformed from within and revealed as an even greater, revealed in spite of itself, to be an even greater manifestation of the depths of unity and
yeah,
the great resources that are in unity that can brace even
yes,
this you know
yes.
Mm.
I'm reminded a bit of John's term about opponent processing, I think it is. This idea
Mhm.
that it's good to have opposing forces that
yeah,
can lead to a higher unity. And yeah, I guess,
Yeah, for me, I take it to the analogy of like a family, because just because it makes it so simple, it's like there's something very different about my wife and I arguing about our unified life,
yeah,
and having disagreements, but within the commitment of being together, as
yeah,
opposed to
yeah,
there's something absolutely different about us. It's like there's a it puts me in the hierarchy of being. If I am,
yeah,
I am my electrons up to my atoms, up to my cells and my organs coming together in my body, but then I see that I'm actually a part of my family and a part of my community. Well, if when I take that step to go, no, it stops with me,
hmm,
and now I'm not, the things I'm caring about, the things I'm doing are against my wife, or we are now divorcing, or we are now separating. That there's
hmm.
something absolutely ontologically like evil, I almost want to say. There's something,
Well,
um,
that's the etymology of the word diabolical.
yes,
Do you know that that's what the word
right.
means? I mean, symbol
Yes.
means joining together.
Separating.
yes,
Diabolical means setting
yes.
at odds. It's the very meaning of the diabolical.
Ah, this takes me back to what you wrote that John Vervaeke made so popular about the hermeneutics of suspicion,
Yeah,
Hmm.
and just how suspicion is such
Yeah,
the enemy, because it must be in this oppositional and a prideful kind
yeah,
of an ontology.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it also, your comments there point to, you were talking about having disagreements with your wife inside of the given unity, the family that you just sort of take for granted. I mean, that connects with the observation earlier about the meaning of authority as having, it's like being part of a family,
yes,
Mm.
um, that's presupposed by, as a kind of a comprehensive, um, uh, gathering that holds all the pieces together, so that the unity doesn't have to be arbitrarily fabricated through particular decisions, or we will be joined together because we will come to a certain agreement.
yes,
I mean,
yes,
that's not how, like, as you say, that's not how a husband and wife talk. It's not like, well, if we
Right.
can come to an agreement, we will be together. No, you're already together.
yes,
Right. Yeah.
And that's what allows you to come to agreement to the extent that you do, is because
Right.
you're already one. Yeah,
yes. Perhaps it's also this embracing of life that is necessary, similar to the relationship or the family. It's not like kind of this is how I view my relationship with my wife. It's that we don't bring up the word divorce, like it's not really an option in our
Mhm.
minds, and through that commitment things flourish. But I think
Yeah,
a lot of people have this relationship to life itself that it's almost divorced. Their being is almost divorced from life itself, and that's impeding them from kind of harmonizing with it, because
yeah,
there's still kind of the option to
yeah.
reject, neglect, to yeah, to say no
I
to.
mean, it's there's this. I don't know if you're familiar with this radio program, This American Life.
No.
It's a really interesting program. The stories, they're just
Ah,
stories collected by this guy, Ira Glass, and I don't know what his background is. I think he's Jewish by background, but secular Jew,
ah,
I think. But in one of his programs, he was just reflecting. He was telling a story and reflecting on Catholic friends that he knew, and he was talking about marriage, and he brought up this point that the Catholics that he knew mentioned to him, and that was that it was precisely the knowing that divorce wasn't an option that allowed them to actually work through problems.
yes,
So rather
Mm.
than that uh, sort of the givenness of their unity making the problem seem infinite because there's no way we're ever going to get out of it. Quite the contrary, it actually shrunk the gravity
Mm.
of the problems
yes,
because they knew in a way that the problems would always be contextualized and
yes,
therefore
Mm.
kind of kept in the proper proportions and so forth in relation to this unity. And he was just saying that struck him as a really true thing that he could understand, and maybe that's what the if there is a unity of churches of the church that we can recover, it would be something in the form of a it has to be somehow in the form of a recognition of a unity that's already there
yes,
and a
Mm.
recovery of a sense of growing from the same root rather than a result of a contract or agreement or a deal, as we've been saying.
Right.
yes. This is what we were discussing, Matthew. Like I have people around me. So I live in The Hague, which is very international, and a friend of mine is Colombian, and we were speaking about kind of faith, and he was asking me about my faith, and I was telling him that I was Christian,
Mm-hmm.
and he's from a Catholic country, so he couldn't understand that I saw Catholics as Christian, and I saw kind of people from
Mm-hmm.
other denominations. Like
Yeah,
he couldn't grasp that it wasn't actually a different category. Like I was trying
yeah.
to explain it to me, that's kind of all encompassing, and I think that's not a massive stretch to get
Mm-hmm.
this kind of realization in people, and so that's quite hopeful
Yeah,
compared to the kind of feeling far-fetched idea of all same exact church or yeah.
yeah, yeah. That's right. Like a conformity
Yeah,
of thought. There's a difference between conformity and unity in the end. Yeah.
Mm.
absolutely.
Um, Maybe that's a good note. I
Yes.
actually was getting a signal here, a good note to end on now that we've reached unity of.
It did feel symbolically sound indeed. And my wife just got home, so that's gonna
Yeah,
be wonderful. David, thank you so much. I messaged you before a couple of months
yeah,
ago, just
yeah.
listening to some of your work and reading, and it's just been yeah, it's renewal for me to
Yeah,
interact.
no, well, thank you. I'll be meditating on this conversation for a while. I really, really enjoyed it, and I feel like lights are coming on. So
Same for me.
I'll have some
Right.
things to think about. But thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, and thank you, Matthew. It kind of really got this conversation started, posing the question, and
Mhm.
I really enjoyed the dynamic between all three of us. And yeah, thank
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Lucas. And thank you so much, Dr. Schindler. Like I said, you've helped me a lot. So yeah, the you've descended in a way from the podium and the lecture to the internet, but it has borne fruit. And so yeah, no, I'm absolutely grateful. What a great conversation.
all right, gentlemen, I'm gonna let you go. Have a good day. See you.
Take care.
Bye bye.